I love the way he's described himself, which is a seasoned technology and architecture leader and a lapsed entrepreneur. So Pavan is now with OpenDevX. He's the founder. And so Pavan, I'm super curious, as I just mentioned, I'm very curious to listen to this presentation and go from there. Yeah, over to you, mate.
Thank you, Akhil. Pleased to be out here.
Can I just ask? I think you were back in that weird like non-presentation mode. Can you just do that thing again? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, better. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's just getting my speaker notes. Unfortunately, I don't have speaker notes anymore. That's fine. Thanks again, Akhil. This is my third time talking at API Days. So as usual, pleased to be out here. And through this talk, I intend to basically cover a distillation of my experiences, particularly building out developer portals and what developer experience means at its core and how it is key to building successful API developer programs. Just before we start, I'm going to give you a brief introduction about myself. As Akhil already mentioned, um, I am a founder. Been working with startups for the good part of the last 10 years. I've been in business management, even sales roles, but I identify for the most part as a developer. Um, I actually run two things at this point. OpenDevX is our open source framework solution towards building API developer portals and monetizing APIs. But I also run Platformatory, which is a platform strategy and modernization focused consulting gig. We work specifically on the Kong, Kubernetes, Apache Kafka stack, and I'm happy to talk about it specifically elsewhere. But otherwise, API management, API platforms have been a key area of interest to me for the good part of the last 10 years. And through this talk, I hope to provide um, a distillation of my experiences over the years working with customers and what it means to really solve for DevX. So without much ado, I'm going to get straight into the talk and try and restrict this to about 15 minutes. When we talk about DevX, fundamentally, we want to talk about the product in question that the experience is really being designed for. And to that extent, I think the most important aspect is that the API is the product, and that this product orientation is basically going to be the foundation of driving an experience around the product. And that's essentially what DevX reduces to. So DevX is basically customer experience, just in the context of catering to developers who are your primary customers, personas, and their interest is primarily in building stuff for mutual benefit. And a good developer experience is something that enables them to do that better, more efficiently, and is something that incentivizes them to do that more and more. I think we do not want to belabor the point around APIs being products, but out in the wild, we still see APIs, traditionally at least, having an outlook of being integration endpoints. But in 2022, you should be, or you must be thinking about APIs being the gateways towards providing your business in the digital world in an as a service model. So literally, by that definition, an API product is a company or specifically a business capability or a service offering delivered literally as a service. Like any complex problem, developer experience, or building an API developer focused program is at the intersection of several different problem spaces. And this is invariably in a large organization, also a team sport that coincides people, process, tooling. Very specifically, what we want to talk about is the people aspects. API products do need stewardship. and that's where API product managers come in. API product management definitely needs a feedback loop with customers. That's sort of where developer relations, developer advocacy comes in. But the objectives of any API program will basically center around driving growth and usage of APIs. So therefore, any API program must incentivize signing up more developers and getting developers to build more apps, and those apps leading to more usage around these APIs, and potentially by the result of all of these interactions actually lead to more revenue. So the enablement starts basically with people. It will invariably involve tooling, which may be API gateways, API management, developer portals, and things of that sort, which become the actual touch points of delivering those APIs and the experience thereof. And not to forget the process around it. API products do not grow on trees, so therefore they result from the internal processes of an organization, which involves API governance, service ownership, the entire operating model of the API platform, the ecosystem, so on and so forth. Fundamentally, developer experience and API programs are built on top of a great culture. So, one immediate outcome of this orientation is to kind of look at DevX as a marketing problem. As they say, basically, a good product with bad marketing leads to no productive outcome. And it's similar with API products as well. So the art of providing developer experience can be looked at classically in terms of a marketing funnel, uh, specifically that of attracting developers into the program. And this may vary as a function of the segment of developers that you're trying to address, who may be internal, they may be partner developers, they may be external developers, or as some people in the industry put it, the long tail of retail developers. Each of these developer segments will ultimately have different requirements of experiences. But if you want to think about the developer journey at large, it begins with a process that somewhat looks like this. It starts off basically by raising awareness about the API product itself. In other words, it's basically footfall into your API product pages. And then engaging developers who may specifically be interested in building stuff out. And to that extent, this is driving engagement through giving actual details about the API, which may be introspecting, documentation, looking at use cases, looking at how-to guides, possibly participating in a hackathon, getting hands dirty, so on and so forth. Finally, culminating up to signing up. Anonymous developers don't build stuff, so therefore, getting developers on board is obviously the most important step towards actually getting them to build apps. And this process must be basically unobtrusive to the extent that it can be done as easily as possible. And finally, the act of actually building an app with a stated purpose so that you can understand what developers are really building for and at what scale, so that you can provide risk metered, graded governance, personalized support, hand holding, all of these things wherever necessary. Finally, of course, comes the day two operational aspects of getting the app into production. But in general, the point that we are making is that the developer journey is best visualized as a funnel, starting from awareness unto actually getting your app subscribed to the right APIs and finally running in production. To this extent, what are the most important pro tips that we should talk about. I think the first one is a no-brainer. All enterprises wishing to build a good API program must invest in a good developer portal. And the developer portal is pretty much the front-facing store or the most important touch point of delivering the developer experience, and therefore it's also a canvas to basically highlight your brand and push in a strong trust signal. The second aspect that we talked about in the context of engineering and experience and attracting developers into your program is to incentivize signing up. Anonymous developers will basically eventually disengage. So therefore, what incentives can be created towards getting developers to sign up is an important aspect of delivering the right developer experience. The third aspect would be the time to first app, specifically app onboarding. And we've seen that app onboarding is a contentious issue in the context of delivering developer experience, primarily because, especially in large regulated industries, even fintechs to a large extent, there is the aspect of governance, and governance is a 10-letter word. So governance or overly complicated onboarding steps in order to just get the developer up and running is a sure way to kill developer interest. So therefore, developer experience is ultimately best indicated by a one-page checkout, or in this case, a one-page app onboarding process through which you can get the developer running as soon as possible. I think we talked about this briefly. Internal developers who are probably in your organization or partner developers who may be building apps basically because their organization is invested in your APIs. And finally, retail developers who are basically building out of self-interest or potentially another monetary interest, all have different motivations, and therefore they may need very specifically different developer portals, different experiences, or it may even require decomposing your API program differently altogether. So the point is, the developer experience is not a one size fits all. It must be tailored per segment of developers. Finally, we should talk about knowing your developer. This is a close metaphor to just knowing your customer, so that upselling, cross-selling efforts, or in this case, more specifically, better recommendation, personalization, and engagement of developers can be based upon prior knowledge of who the developer is, what they do, and what are they specifically trying to build, so that ultimately you help them succeed in what they're trying to do. So we did till this point we've basically talked about DevX as a marketing problem, but it's also important to point out the fact that marketing cannot solve our product problems. And that brings us to an important point around the specialty of API product management itself. And API product management is interesting and curious, primarily because product management in general has been centered around people who have an outside-in view, an understanding of customer problems, and a general orientation towards problem solving. API product management definitely relies on these qualities, but in addition, API product management also necessitates that API product managers actually be builders at some level, understand the developer mind, understand ecosystem considerations at large. You know, are these APIs potentially in conflict with what a developer might want to build themselves. And that is sort of in the zone of self-branded apps problem, which a lot of organizations run into. I do digress, but that's a story for another talk, perhaps. But API product management and API product managers must fundamentally own the product value proposition and therefore the entire experience as well at one level. API product management also coalesces into other specialties such as developer relationship management, developer focused marketing, even architecture and governance to a large extent. There are great resources. What I'm showing out here is the Nordic APIs model around just an API product model canvas. An API product canvas towards an effort to basically distill what is the API product value proposition about. And I would encourage organizations that are actually trying to build a good DevX to fundamentally get their mental model aligned towards something like this. But if you unpack the API product experience from a developer perspective, the developer would be interested in a crisp value proposition. What is it that can be built with the API product? What are the key data points on usage maturity, particularly in the face of very volatile, just about emerging API products? There is a lack of incentive towards building something on top of an API that may simply not be ready for prime time yet. So therefore, data points and metrics, specifically signaling, how mature the API product is, who else uses it, what can you do with it, is an important part of the value proposition. We should definitely talk about key use cases. Use cases demonstrate the art of the possible. It is nudging developers towards what you may want them to build. In a true ecosystem scenario, developers are expected to come up with scenarios where scenarios which you may not have possibly thought of. But nonetheless, in the short term, achieving the API product market fit is a gradual iterative process. So therefore, serving a good DevX basically means nudging developers towards use cases that you see value in from an ecosystem standpoint, what can be built, and what has already been built by others. The next thing is to talk about transparency of rate limits and pricing. As usual, any developer or even a developer organization in a B2B context will be interested in what is it going to cost you and how much of it can you use. That reduces to rate limits, pricing, amongst other things. Finally, API product detail pages are essentially like product pages. For example, using an e-commerce metaphor, the next best action, or specifically the next action, is really towards figuring out whether to dive deep into the docs more, or actually trying things out, or actually start building, or perhaps get support from the organization towards that next best action. So in other words, API products must also channelize the developer journey towards the next goal. Finally, we should talk about API design. Developer experience is to one extent about the journey and the marketing aspects, as well as the product value proposition aspects. But API design is also at the core of it. Self-documentation and interactive API consoles are part of standard requirements these days. An ideal DevX involves good interface documentation, along with the ability to try things out in an interactive API console. We do see Swagger UI, OpenAPI based interactive consoles being the norm these days, but a more integrated experience is what organizations should aspire for. By integrated experience, I mean the ability to basically plug in your app, your credentials into the interactive console flow is something that's going to make developers' lives a lot easier. Second very important point is on polyglot support. Um, you must measure developer experience basically on the basis of time to first line of code. So SDKs, ready to deploy containerized kits that developers can just pick up and start getting their way with is going to lead to much better outcomes than having to build from scratch. API security must be standardized. Do what API, what developers understand, and what many programming languages have, and specifically HTTP clients, for example, have idiomatic support for, which is things like OAuth, the ability to have introspectable JOT tokens, so on and so forth. Finally, we see that API design tends to, at least even up till this date, have a centricity around request response REST APIs, but there are emerging possibilities beyond all of this. Specifically, I'm pointing at GraphQL, which is a lot more developer centric, basically because it imposes few restrictions on how you want to consume the data model. Similarly, there are emerging standards around async API, cloud events for asynchronous APIs, Kafka APIs, so on and so forth. There's also a resurgence of gRPC, Dabo. These are more RPC-oriented protocols, which basically definitely solve problems around just serialization, better typing of data, amongst other things. So in general, API design is a very important pillar of engineering good developer experience. And finally, we do come to day two aspects of DevX, which is solving more for retaining developers who already built out apps and growing them. And to that extent, we should talk about a few more tips. The first thing is avoiding surprises and having a good deprecation policy. This is primarily about avoiding surprises. If APIs are being properly lifecycle managed, which is either by date or a named version, uh, ensure that you inform developers through a reliable channel in advance when change action is warranted. As usual, change is always frowned upon, but you can definitely make developers' lives easier by minimizing change and by enabling good communication. The next idea is basically around enabling quota and budget alerts. Your developers must be able to take action, ideally programmatically, in the data, in the path of the data itself, in data plane, so to put it. Uh, how would this work? Basically, think about inserting headers, for example, on what your balance quota is, which may be number of API calls or even a budget if APIs are being billed and monetized. Therefore, alerting outside the path of the data, but also in data plane alerting so that developers can programmatically take action and avoid surprises, particularly on the budget front. Finally, we talk about audit and observability logs, basically more forensic self-service inspection. Is it down for just me or everybody else? Inform about ongoing disruptions and service status. And finally, when push comes to shove, provide a help desk support channel. These are a few tips in terms of engineering for good DevX on day two. And we draw to a close. I think engineering good DevX is not the bastion of big tech and digital natives alone. Others can also do it. There are unbounded ecosystem possibilities in doing so. We would want to leave the advice that mature ecosystems will at least incentivize developers to build. So therefore, in this model, developers get paid somehow, make money. And finally, we exit with the subject of the talk, that DevX must be the foundation of building successful API developer programs, and product orientation is the most important step that you can take in that direction.
Amazing. That was bang on time, Pavan. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, it was so bang on time that we don't have time for Q&A. But a lot of really good information packed in. I think for those listening in, whether they're individual contributors or managers and so forth, I think there's a lot there for how you build your own developer portals. I've done that recently, and it is painful. So definitely heed a lot of the pro tips. And Pavan, if you're interested, I invite you on the public chat for stage 2 to maybe pop your details in. If anyone wants to connect and talk more, I'd love for that to happen. But unfortunately, we do have to say goodbye to you at this point and move to the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Akhil, and the organizers of API Days.
All right. Thanks, Pavan.